All right, so today we're taking a deep dive into graph neural networks.
CNN.
GNNs, right?
Yeah.
These AI tools that are so powerful for, analyzing all the relationships and the connections and patterns in complex data.
Absolutely.
And we're talking, social networks, molecules, maps, anything you can think of.
The fascinating thing about them is that they work really well for analyzing connections, but they kind of hit a roadblock when the connections represent different types of information.
Oh, so like you're saying you couldn't use the same GNN to analyze, say, a social network, and then also a diagram of how atoms connect in a molecule.
Yeah, that's a great example.
Okay, so they're both graphs, right?
Yeah.
Like we're still talking about nodes and edges and connections.
Right. But the problem is in what we call feature spaces.
Feature spaces.
Yeah, think of it this way. In a social network, a feature might be like your age or your location or your interest, but in a molecule, the features are totally different.
Right, they'd be chemical properties or like bonds or the structure of the atoms.
Exactly. It's like comparing apples and oranges.
Yeah, you can't analyze them the same way.
Right.
So how are researchers getting around this?
So that's where this new research comes in, and they have this really brilliant solution. It's a technique called TANSS,
TANS.
which stands for Topology-Aware Node Description Synthesis.
Okay.
And it uses language models to kind of bridge the gap between these different feature spaces.
Okay, language models,
Yeah.
like the things behind chatbots.
Exactly.
What do those have to do with graphs?
So TANS leverages the power of these language models to create a text description for each node in a graph, regardless of the original data format.
Okay.
And these descriptions, in turn, create what we call text-attributed graphs.
Okay, text-attributed graphs, so tags.
Or tags, right?
Gotcha.
And you can kind of imagine each node in our social network or our molecule now has a little label explaining its key features.
So it's almost like giving each node a name tag, making it easier to understand, and then you can compare them across different graphs because now they have the shared language.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
So I get that, but doesn't that mean you need descriptions for like every single node?
That's the catch with traditional tag approaches. It does.
What about like real-world data where that kind of labeling just doesn't exist?
That's the problem that TNS is tackling head-on.
Oh, interesting.
It doesn't require these pre-existing descriptions.
Okay.
It analyzes the structure of the graph itself to generate these textual labels.
Okay.
So it follows a four-step process.
All right, lay it on me.
So first, it dives into the graph structure to compute what we call topological properties for each node.
Topological process. So is that kind of like figuring out a node's importance based on like its connections and its role in the whole network?
You got it.
Okay.
So it analyzes things like how many direct connections a node has. And that's called degree centrality.
Degree centrality, okay.
It looks at whether a node acts as a bridge between different parts of the graph.
Oh, so like if a lot of other nodes have to go through it to connect to each other?
Exactly.
That one would have high between-mainness.
Yeah, betweenness centrality.
Yeah.
It looks at how easily a node can reach other nodes, and that's called closeness centrality.
Gotcha.
And finally, it checks how densely connected its neighborhood is, so all the nodes immediately around it, and that's represented by what's called a clustering coefficient.
Okay, so we've got these 4 different measures, and they all give us different insights into the structure and the importance of each node.
Exactly.
So what do we do with all this information?
So that brings us to step 2.
Okay.
Using these calculated properties, TNS generates these initial basic descriptions for each node.
Okay.
And if there's any existing text associated with the node or its neighbors, it throws that in too.
So it's kind of giving the language model some context.
Exactly.
Some clues to work with.
Right.
I see where this is going.
But we're not done yet.
Okay.
This is just the starting point.
Okay.
These initial descriptions are then fed into a large language model,
An LLM.
or LLM, in step 3.
This is where we're bringing in the big guns.
Yeah, you could say that.
So what does the LLM do with these descriptions?
So it's given a specific task. Predict what categories this node might belong to.
Okay.
And crucially, explain why it made that prediction.
Oh, explain why. Okay,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
And the goal is to generate descriptions that are really broadly applicable.
So not like super specific to just one type of graph.
Exactly.
So it's not just labeling a node as, airport. It's saying this is a central transportation hub with many connections, which could apply to other types of graphs.
That's exactly.
That's really smart. Okay, so what happens in the final step?
So in the fourth and final step, the LLM's output, its predictions, and those all-important explanations become the final polished descriptions for each node.
Okay.
And with that, we've transformed our initial graph into a text-attributed graph.
A tag.
A tag, ready for analysis by GNN.
That's incredible. So even if we start with a graph that has absolutely zero text, TNS can still create these rich descriptions just based on, where the node sits in the network and how it's connected. And that's what makes it so powerful. But here's what I'm really curious about. TNS isn't limited to just text-free graphs, right?
Right. Yeah, it can handle different levels of existing text.
Okay.
In fact, if we have a graph with rich textual descriptions already, TNS can actually enhance those descriptions by incorporating insights from the graph's structure.
So it's taking something that's already good and making it even better.
Exactly.
So what if we have a graph that has like some text, but it's kind of sparse or incomplete?
In those cases, TNS steps in to kind of fill in the gaps.
Okay.
And it uses those topological properties we talked about earlier to supplement those existing descriptions with those valuable insights.
It's like a detective piecing together a story from a few clues.
Exactly.
All right, so TNS is adaptable.
It is.
I like that. But I know our listeners are eager to hear about the results.
Of course.
Did this technique actually work?
Well, the researchers put TNS to the test in two main scenarios. First, they evaluated its performance in what's called single graph learning.
Single graph learning.
And this involves training and testing the model on the same graph.
Okay.
Which is a classic setup for tasks like node classification.
So like if we were trying to label airports based on their activity levels, just using data from one airport network.
Precisely.
Okay.
And even in this seemingly straightforward scenario, TNS outperformed methods that relied solely on raw features or the original text descriptions.
Interesting. So it's already showing an advantage.
It is.
But I feel like the real test, the one that really showcases the potential of TNS, is how it performs across different graphs, right?
Absolutely.
So we're talking cross-graph learning.
Right.
Okay, so what did they do there?
For cross-graph learning, they tested TNS in two particularly challenging scenarios.
Okay.
Pre-train and fine-tune.
Pre-train and fine-tune.
Domain adaptation.
Domain adaptation. Okay, break those down for me.
Sure.
Pre-train and fine-tune sounds a bit like training an athlete for a specific competition. You start with general fitness, and then you refine their skills for that particular event.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Okay.
So in this scenario, you pre-train the model on one graph, allowing it to learn these general patterns and relationships, and then you fine-tune it on a second graph from a different domain, leveraging that pre-existing knowledge to adapt quickly and effectively.
So you're giving the model a head start.
Exactly.
It already understands how information flows through networks generally.
Right.
So it can learn the specifics of this new domain much faster.
Exactly.
Okay. And how did it do?
And in these pre-train and fine-tune tests, TNS significantly outperformed methods that just tried to align features without generating those textual descriptions.
The descriptions are really important.
They seem to be.
They're capturing something fundamental about the nodes.
It seems that way.
Something that can translate across those different domains.
Right.
Now, domain adaptation, that sounds even tougher.
It is a tougher challenge.
Okay, so what's happening there?
So in this scenario, you train the model on one graph, and then you directly apply it to another graph without any fine-tuning whatsoever.
Whoa, that's like asking a chef who specializes in French cuisine to suddenly prepare an Italian feast with no prior experience.
A perfect analogy.
That's a big ask.
It's a real test of adaptability.
Okay.
And surprisingly, TNS did remarkably well even in this setting.
Really?
And the researchers demonstrated this using these text-free airport networks.
Text-free airport network.
Where nodes represent airports and edges represent flight connections. So they let TNS generate these textual descriptions purely based on the network's topology, those structural insights that we talked about. And then they took that trained model and applied it to a completely different airport network without any tweaking or adjustments.
That's bold.
It is.
So how did it do?
The results were impressive even without any fine-tuning. TNS was able to accurately classify airports in the new network based on their activity levels. This suggests that those textual descriptions, even though they were generated purely from the structure of the first network, captured something fundamental about how airports function as part of a larger system, something that generalized to a completely different airport network.
That is really incredible. So it's showing us that it can find these underlying patterns, this essence of what makes a node,
Right.
regardless of the specific domain.
That's what it seems to be doing.
Like it's unlocked a secret language that connects these different networks.
Well, getting it.
This feels like a paradigm shift in how we think about analyzing and understanding these complex systems.
I think so.
So now that we've seen how well TNS performs,
Yes.
Can we dive into some specific examples?
Absolutely.
I know our listeners are eager to hear how this could actually be applied in the real world.
Let's explore some concrete examples in a few key domains.
So we're back, and we've been exploring TANs.
Right.
This amazing technique that can analyze graphs, even if they have different features, different ways of representing information.
Yeah, and in the previous segment, we talked about how it performs really well in both single and cross-graph learning.
Right, showing us that it can transfer knowledge between domains that you wouldn't think are related at all.
Exactly. It's like a universal translator for graph data.
That's a great way to put it. So let's talk about some real-world applications.
Okay.
Where could TAN-S make a real difference?
Well, the possibilities are pretty vast, but let's focus on a few key areas.
Okay.
One that comes to mind immediately is drug discovery.
Drug discovery.
Imagine a graph representing known drug molecules where nodes are atoms and edges are chemical bonds.
Okay, so like a complex network of interconnected nodes,
Right.
each one representing a different element.
Right, and if we apply TAN-S to this graph,
Mm-hmm.
it could generate textual descriptions for each node, capturing not just the atom itself, but its chemical properties based on its position in the molecule and its interactions with neighboring atoms.
So it's going beyond just saying carbon or hydrogen
Exactly.
and adding those details about the role it plays in the overall structure.
Right, and you could then train a GNN on this text-attributed graph to predict the biological activity of these molecules.
So essentially you're teaching an AI model how to identify potential drug candidates.
That's the idea, but here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Imagine you have a new graph representing a library of uncharacterized molecules, maybe synthesized in a lab or discovered in nature.
Okay.
And we may not know their exact chemical structures, but we can still analyze their topology.
And using TAN-S,
All right.
you could generate descriptions for these new molecules just based on their structural similarities to the known molecule.
Exactly. It's like finding a molecular doppelganger.
And using that to predict the properties of the new molecule.
Right. And then you could use that pre-trained GNN to predict the biological activity of these new molecules, potentially identifying promising candidates for further testing.
So this could really speed up the drug discovery process.
Significantly.
Wow, leading to faster development of new treatments and therapy.
That's the hope.
That's amazing. CAN-S could really revolutionize how we approach drug discovery.
It has the potential.
So are there other fields where it could have this kind of impact?
Absolutely. Let's shift gears to personalized medicine.
Personalized medicine, an area where really understanding individual differences is so important.
It's essential.
How would TAN-S fit into that picture?
So let's say we have a graph representing a patient's medical history.
Right.
Nodes could be diagnoses, procedures, medications, even lifestyle factors.
So like a medical roadmap.
Exactly.
Right.
And edges represent the relationships between these events.
Right.
Now, if we apply TAN-S to this graph,
Uh-huh.
it could generate textual descriptions for each node, capturing the context and significance of each event within the patient's overall health narrative.
Okay, so for instance, it might describe a diabetes diagnosis, not just as diabetes, but as early onset diabetes with a family history and controlled through diet and exercise.
Exactly.
So much more information.
Much richer, much more personalized.
Capturing details that traditional medical records just don't.
Right. And then you could train a GNN on this text-attributed graph
Okay.
to predict the patient's risk of developing certain conditions or their likely response to different treatments.
So we're taking it a step further.
But we can go even further.
Oh, okay. How so?
This is where the cross-graph learning capabilities of TAN-S really shine.
Okay.
Imagine a separate graph representing a vast database of clinical trials, research findings, treatment outcomes.
Like a huge knowledge base of medical information.
Exactly, constantly being updated.
Yeah.
And we can use TAN-S to generate descriptions for the nodes in this research graph, allowing us to compare it to the patient's individual medical graph.
Okay.
And by finding similarities between the two,
Uh-huh.
we could identify clinical trials or treatment approaches that are most likely to benefit that specific patient.
So it's like having a personalized medical research assistant sifting through mountains of data
Right.
to find the most relevant options.
Mhm.
That's incredible. And I imagine this could apply to so many other areas as well.
Absolutely. We could apply TAN-S to social networks to understand how information spreads,
Uh-huh.
or to financial data to predict market trends.
We could even use it to analyze transportation networks to optimize traffic flow and urban planning.
Exactly. The applications are really limitless.
It's mind-blowing to think about all the connections CANS can make, offering a new way to understand and analyze these complex systems.
He's powerful.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into TANs, what are the key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, I think at its core, TNS highlights the power of combining structural insights from graphs with the expressive capabilities of language models.
Yeah, it's really showing us the importance of looking beyond those individual data points
Right.
and focusing on the relationships between them.
Exactly.
And it's underscoring the potential of AI to not just analyze data, but to generate insights and drive innovation across so many different fields.
It's exciting.
It really is. It's been an incredible journey exploring TNS with you. We've seen how it's pushing the boundaries of what's possible with graph neural networks and opening up all these exciting new avenues for research and application.
For sure.
And as we conclude, I encourage our listeners to think about how TANs could be applied to their own fields or areas of interest.
Yeah, think about the possibilities.
The potential for discovery is immense.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of TANs.